Europe is on fire. Oil prices have got the whole world fuming. All kinds of things are happening in the rest of the world. In Pakistan, Imran Khan's vote of confidence or no confidence proceedings have now begun. In the middle of all this, Australians have won their series in Pakistan, a hard-fought series. But you know what? We are not talking about any of this today and Cut the Clutter. We are instead talking about something you might have forgotten or gotten bored with. But the fact is, it's a very important issue, and that is the farm reform laws. We know that the laws were enacted a couple of years back, and then there were these big protests, and then the laws were withdrawn. If you've been following Cut the Clutter and my writings and whatever I say in the public domain, you also know that I don't even need to make the disclosure now that I was and I am still a strong supporter of the farm laws. I thought that they were pro-farmer, they were good for the farmers. I also said that Modi government erred big time in the way those laws were passed, because such important laws cannot be passed, should not be passed through the ordinance route. Because once you do this through the ordinance route, everybody starts getting suspicious that, look, if the government thought these things were so good for me, why did they use the ordinance route? You could have just presented this in Parliament, allowed a debate. So if this was done not through the ordinance route, in Parliament, through a debate, maybe given to a committee for some time, or if that takes too long, and all right, you didn't want to waste the crisis, at least a 5-day debate on this perhaps would have taken away some of the suspicions. But that is so much water across the Jamna, right? That is now a past story. Those laws have been withdrawn. Now, when these laws were being so controversial and contentious, the Supreme Court had set up a committee. The Supreme Court had set up a committee to look at the laws and to suggest further improvements, reforms, and also to see if those laws are fair, legal, etc. or not. Now, that committee's report submitted last year had never been made public. So the Supreme Court, in its eternal wisdom, had not made it public. Maybe they thought that now the story was getting over anyway. Laws were being withdrawn by Parliament, and already it had become quite evident that that is where we were headed. They didn't bother to make it public. Now, one of the 3 members of that committee, Anil Ghanwat, has made that report public. And one, he's done a big favor to public debate, and second, he's added to our wisdom. Now, there's been some discussion on this report, but most of the discussion so far is on the claim that the authors of the report, that is Pramod Joshi, Anil Ghanwat, the person who actually made this report public, and Professor Ashok Gulati. Now, there's been a lot of debate on the report's claim that 83 or 86%, that means a vast majority of the farmers and farmer organizations, or farmer organizations representing a vast majority of the farming community, supported these laws. Now, that has been disputed, including by Yogendra Yadav in his article at ThePrint, and he says that is not correct. You don't have any evidence to say that so many people supported it, and who are the people you consulted, etc. But I'm going beyond that, because since this follow-on debate in this era of short attention time spans has got caught only over whether they consulted the right farmers organizations, whether they consulted the relevant organizations, or they only consulted the pro-reform organizations, or maybe stooges. That is not the most important thing. That is important, but the important thing, even more important, is what is it that they have recommended in that report. And that, unfortunately, has got lost in this controversial environment. So it's a large report. I'm sharing a whole link with you. You can read the whole report. It's quite well written. You can understand it, and understand it to the extent that even if you disagree with it, you can disagree with it strongly, because the report is quite clear. So I compliment the authors for their clarity. You can agree with it. You may not agree with it. Once again, as far as I am concerned, I mostly agree with the recommendations. I would say some of these recommendations help to take away many of the anxieties that came in with these laws, and these were genuine anxieties for the farmers. But in some ways, this report, these recommendations even go beyond the farm laws in terms of the reform that they demand. Now, whether that will happen or not, I don't know. But this, if anything, some of the recommendations are even more radical in the reform and the change they seek than the farm laws. Once again, my view, to be transparent, is that those are good ideas, and I will come to that. So what I've done is, with the help of Amog Rometra, a young fellow who does help me often with this research, I've taken out 10 points, 10 highlight points from these recommendations. And I will just explain those to you briefly, and then you make up your own mind. I will not read the names of all the laws. You can see all the laws as we speak. Those will all be on the screen. So because those names are also tongue twisters, because I don't know how our civil services and how our law ministries and various ministries name these laws. I wish laws had simpler names. So these are sort of tongue twister names. So I'm not reading them out, but you read them on the screen. So first of all, there was one disagreement with the laws that the farmers had. That if there is a disagreement, the farm laws said, I can't go to court. I have to go to my district magistrate, deputy commissioner, subdivisional magistrate. That means the revenue head, the revenue department. Now, if you've lived in rural India, nobody trusts the revenue department. Also because revenue department you usually think is a place where you go for disputes. It can be land ownership, documentation, succession, all kinds of things. And you also know that revenue officials are very busy. Who trusts the patwari? Who trusts the tehsildar? Who trusts the SDM, DM? And our DMs are very busy doing all kinds of things all the time. So the committee says that because revenue authorities are much too busy to give a speedy resolution to these issues, and they are also not fully trusted, an alternative mechanism for dispute settlement should be found. And this can be like access to civil courts. Now you might say civil courts take too long. So they've recommended the government should think about setting up farmers' courts under the Commercial Courts Act. So these farmers' courts only look at farm disputes, which otherwise would have gone to civil courts, would have taken forever, and now under the new law would have gone to the revenue head, who's too busy doing too many things anyway. And then they say, to make it even stronger and to make it more implementable and to take away the creases, central government can set up an agricultural marketing council on the lines of the GST Council. Now your GST Council, finance ministers of all states meet, and it happens under the auspices of the finance ministry, and the finance minister sits there and you resolve your disputes and take out all the creases in the arrangement. So just as there is GST Council, they recommend setting up an agricultural marketing council where all states are represented, and it's headed by the Union Agriculture Minister. So that's the first one. The second one, again, and this is about a law that's called Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act. Now, Section 6 of this act says that when farmers sell their produce, say through electronic platforms or through new trade platforms and trade areas, so not through the APMCs, that is the Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee, then APMCs worry that if they start selling through those mechanisms, they will not come to us. And today, we, the mandis or APMCs, we charge a levy. We have a service tax or a levy or whatever. That is a lot of money for us, and that's a lot of money for the surplus producing states also. That money will go away. We are losing that. So the committee has a tough recommendation, but I think it also provides a resolution. So they say, first of all, that all these mandi fees or this APMC cesses should remain abolished anyway, right? So even if there is a trading platform, electronic platform, they will also need arbitrage. Otherwise, nobody does it out of charity. So let these prices or these charges be set on a competitive basis. That will make the farmer happier. That will reduce the transaction cost for the farmer. More money will come to the farmer and less will go to the middleman. Now, having said that, then what happens to these APMCs? Because states say that we lose all these revenues, and APMC says we lose all these revenues. And as we found out with the farm protests, a lot of the well-to-do farmers, well-to-do is only in the farming context. Farmers are not billionaires, right? In the farming context, many of them have also interests in running APMC businesses. Many of them also become traders and middlemen. So how do you also make sure that while you reduce transaction costs, APMCs don't suffer? So in fact, the committee has come up with a finding. They say the mandi fee collections in the states, in all the states of India together, about 9 to 10,000 crores per year. That's $1.5 billion per year. It's not that much, 9 to 10,000 crores. And they take that also as the 2021 figure. So it can go up a little bit, but won't go up that much more. Of these, the lion's share goes to Punjab, Haryana, UP, I suspect MP and some other states which produce surpluses. So of the 9 to 10,000 crores that the entire country's mandis collect, Punjab, Haryana, UP, they have 1,000 crore plus for each of these states. Now, the committee says that, all right, so states and the mandis don't want to lose this money. So set up a central fund, a compensation fund for 3 to 5 years to provide for the transition. And once again, they take their inspiration from GST. They say just as the center set up a compensation fund for losses because of the GST, so states that suffered a loss, they were then compensated. And similarly, this should be done. And they say that further, if you read the report of the 15th Finance Commission, then in Chapter 10, 15th Finance Commission has something called the Performance-Based Incentive Grants for Agriculture. And they say there, these schemes, that is a compensation fund, can be dovetailed with that. So third recommendation was how to compensate APMCs and states. The fourth recommendation is on the Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. I'm not reading the full name of the act. Now there, they say, look, first of all, draft a model contract agreement. Because when a farmer does contract farming for somebody, there should be one model contract agreement. So there are not 10,000 kinds of agreements floating and every lawyer comes up with their own agreement. So have one model agreement, put it on the web, let them decide, come with a final version. So next, this is the fifth recommendation. Provision should be made in case market prices go higher than contracted prices. And I presume if they go lower than contracted prices. So they say in this contract, to protect the sanctity of the contract, each side, the farmer and the buyer, should have two witnesses. So that at least aankh ka sharam, if not aankh ka sharam, then legal commitment of the witnesses will ensure that the contract is followed. Now next, number 6, they talk about what changes to make in the Essential Commodities Act amendment. And that is among the more radical suggestions of the committee. They say that, look, we know that Essential Commodities Act came from an era of shortages and scarcity. That era is now over. India has more than sufficient grain. So you don't need Essential Commodities Act. So in fact, the committee goes so far as to say that amending the Essential Commodities Act is not enough. If you really want to be fair to the farmer, just abolish the entire act. So that's a lot more radical than the Modi government tried to do. I don't think at this point, Indian public opinion, particularly in the farmer side, will immediately be amenable to something like that. And they say even if you can't completely abolish the act, then at least you should greatly liberalize it, because this is not good for the farmers. And they say that even in the amended act, you say now that Essential Commodities Act or restrictions under Essential Commodities Act, stock holdings, restrictions of stock holdings, trade, etc., kick in if the price of perishables goes up by 100% and the price of non-perishables goes up by 50%. So they say even if you don't abolish the act, at least increase these limits. So price of perishables has to go up by 200% for these restrictions to kick in, and price of perishables by 75% for these to kick in. So at least for extraordinary circumstances, you have protections, but it can't just be misused or used all the time or invoked all the time. Then number 7, very important, and these are the agricultural produce pricing policies. So the committee member says that, look, legalizing MSP is not sound logic. It's not a good idea. Farmers organizations were demanding that there should be a law passed that minimum support price now is a legal right. They say it's a very bad idea. It's also infeasible. Agricultural produce should be traded on a trade viable price, not at a preset price. And they also say that MSP was an idea to protect the farmer against the undue fall in the price of a produce, not to set a price for the market. And I'm so glad that they've called out this mythology and also, if I may say so, great hypocrisy that Government of India provides MSP for 23 crops. They say that no government of India ever has the money to provide MSP for 23 crops. They cannot procure all these crops at MSP, 23 crops. It never happens. It's a mythology. And they say that this statistical or political fraud of MSP for 23 products actually gets the farmer stuck, because farmer is not able to sell, is not willing to sell at the price that the market may pay. Traders may not be willing to buy at this price. Government does not have the money to buy at this price. So farmers get stuck in this situation. So this is an unworkable situation. So if the committee does not like legalizing MSP, what is it that they want? Because they say that MSP is market distortionary. So what is it that works? So this is the 8th highlight that we have picked up. They say that MSP for cereals, that is basically rice and wheat, has actually led to this massive distortion. India already has 2.5 times the buffer stock norms of rice and wheat. We don't know what to do with this wheat. At any given time, 2 to 2.5 lakh crores is stuck in these stocks, which we have very little use for. So what do we do with this? So they say, look, maybe time has now come. Another radical suggestion, and I would suspect that this will draw immediate criticism and alarm from those who don't like farm reforms. And once again, the fact that it hasn't happened already is possibly because those who've rejected the report have not read the recommendations. Once again, if this could be done, I'll be very happy. So I have to be very clear. So they say, or maybe you should put a cap. Government of India should put a cap on how much you will procure at MSP based on PDS needs. So government only buys what it needs for PDS. The rest goes to open market. And they say, look, this open-ended procurement on MSP now has to end. It is not only unsustainable economically, this is distorting the composition of output in many states, mostly Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, and it also has environmental consequences. In Punjab and Haryana, people are pulling out water from deep underground using free power. So the water table is going lower and lower and lower and lower. Second, too much paddy is being produced. And third, that stubble is being burned. So there are also serious environmental consequences. So MSP savings, when government starts procuring much less on MSP, that means they only procure what is needed for PDS. The money that is saved, that money should be put into a price stabilization fund. And that fund can then be used to support nutri-cereals. I think it means millets, jowar, bajra, like that, pulses, dals, oil seeds, and even onions and potatoes. So those farmers can get support from that leftover money, which today is unnecessarily going into wheat and rice. Now, 9th point that we have picked up becomes even more radical. They say, look, agriculture is a diversified profession in India. Different states, different regions follow different practices. India is also a federal country, so states should have much more power and much more options on procurement of crops on MSP, depending on what are their policy priorities. So in this case, allocate the money to the state that say, look, you can spend this much money on buying crops on MSP, but you decide which crops these will be. Again, if it can be done, a great idea. I suspect what will happen in this case is that some states will accept it, Possibly the BJP-led states will accept it. And once they get started, others will follow. But I think it's a radical but a good idea. The last highlight that we have picked up, they say now that we tell you that MSP, legalizing MSP is a bad idea. Also, MSP itself is distortionary and is not good for either the farmers or the consumers or the markets. We have to make a plan 10 years ahead in terms of what crops to support based on what is it that we want the farmers to be growing. What are the products India needs? For example, I'm giving you an example right now that India is hugely surplus in wheat and rice, but India is hugely deficient in oil seeds. India is also deficient in a big way on pulses, dals, but also hugely deficient in oil seeds. So maybe it's much better for India if more farmers shift to oil seeds. So government can drop a 10-year MSP roadmap to see what is it that they want to incentivize. And that can be based on procurement, storage, PDS requirement of wheat and rice across states based on objective criteria of production, procurement and poverty. Right? So if a state is very poor, it has to be allocated a lot more grain. Now, states will get the money. In this case, states should be given the money allocated from what is being spent on. And the states can then allocate this money. And then comes the most radical of all recommendations. They say, look, why don't we also give the option of cash to PDS beneficiaries? And that cash should be equal to MSP of a crop plus 25%, that is for handling, transport. And so look, instead of getting your rice at 2 rupees a kilo or wheat at 1 rupee a kilo, I am giving you this cash for grain purchase. So go out and purchase the grain, which means instead of paying it to the farmer and then subsidizing it and paying it to the consumer, to the poorest consumer in India who can't afford to buy it at market price, you are giving the money to the poorest consumer to say, look, buy it at the regular price. So to that extent, you've taken out the market distortion. Whether this will happen in India, I hope it does, but I think it's unlikely that such a thing has happened because this is much too radical. Or they say they just take away this cheap grain, just make it free grain. Just compensate the very poor by way of grain delivery and not distort prices by saying 1 rupee a kilo for wheat, 2 rupees a kilo for rice, because they don't say it. But I know the implication is that once you sell this that cheap, this will find its way, this will leak and finds its way into open market and arbitrage will develop. And wherever arbitrage is developed, there will be corruption like this. Now, before I let you go, this is also an unusual year when you can see how MSP sometimes may not work in the farmer's interest. Look at wheat. Wheat prices now are shooting up. Grain prices had been going up over the last year and a half, 2 years in any case, but now they've shot up because of the war in Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is among the big exporters of wheat across the world. A lot of the African countries, European countries, Pakistan next door, Ukraine has been their grain ball. Now the estimate is, I'm sharing this Twitter thread with you from Dr. Sarah Tabor, who's an agricultural expert. And she says, look, there's a global fear that there'll be wheat shortage. And that's why wheat prices are going up. But she says these fears are misplaced mainly because of India. Because India has a lot of wheat already. And India is heading for a bumper crop, something like 112 million tons. And she says that India already has twice as much as it needs by way of buffer stock. So against about 13.5 million tons, India has about 29 million tons. And now it's getting another 112 million tons coming in. So India is going to have trouble storing this grain. So why is it that despite all this surplus wheat available that India can export, the global markets are not taking this into account and still running anxious and scared? That is because, she says, people think that India is still not capable of logistically. India does not have the logistics to export this wheat. And she says that's wrong. Over the past few years, India has built its railways, logistics and ports. And India is perfectly capable of exporting this wheat, which India can do now. And India will have enough surplus to make up for the shortfall of Ukraine and Russia as well. So the overall shortfall globally is only estimated to be 7 million tons. 7 million tons India can export in no time quite easily without at all feeling the pinch, because India just has so much wheat. And today, when prices are going up so high, what's happening to farmers who have these crops? And Government of India will go and procure this wheat crop at MSP and see who will make profit for this from this upsurge in prices. It will be the Government of India. It could have been the farmer.